Hi, I'm Eric Kimball, and today in this video I want to discuss the topic of winter rye as a cover crop and why you may not want to use winter rye as a cover crop in your garden, especially if you have a traditional style row type garden. I'm actually standing here next to rye in my garden, which is not a conventional garden, and it's nearly 6 foot tall. I planted this rye late last year, in the fall of last year, and it was maybe 2 inches tall in the spring when the snow cleared away. I'm in upstate New York, and then it just took off. And the beautiful thing about rye, and I've said this in previous videos, is that it puts down an enormous amount of root mass. In a conventional garden, according to many of the gardening books that I used to read, I still have and I'll read them, but I used to follow the advice, which was to plant your rye in the fall as a cover crop, and then in the spring you till it in. But there's a problem with that. There's a big problem with that. If you cannot get on the soil with your tiller, we're talking a gardener, not a farmer, if you can't get on the soil when that rye is still lush and has not become woody, like the stalks have not become woody like we see here. If you cannot get on that and till it in to the soil when it's about 1 foot tall or so, then as it gets taller and as the stalks get woody, the process of coming in and tilling it into the soil becomes so much harder. In fact, it becomes almost impossible. Today, as I'm speaking to you, it is Memorial Day weekend, which is the traditional garden planting time of year here in upstate New York. And if I planted rye as a cover crop and I had to prepare it on this weekend, the ground, the soil, it would just be almost impossible task for any garden of any good size, a home garden. So that's the problem. A lot of times you can't get in onto the soil to till it because it's too wet. Usually it's not optimal for tilling or turning under. That's the problem. And when these stalks are so tall, it's impossible. You can't do it. So you'd have to cut off the top growth, and then you would have to till under what's left, and you'd have to give it some time, because as the organic matter decomposes, it ties up fertility. You don't want to plant directly into just tilled in rye cover crop because your fertility is going to be tied up. You have to wait a couple of weeks for the organic matter to break down. Okay, so all of that is reason why you would not necessarily want to plant winter rye, as great of a crop as it is, in your garden. It could turn into a real nightmare, trying to take care of it. However, here in my mini bed gardening system, and if you've watched my videos, you know I'm a mini bed experimenter. I'm into my 6th year of mini bed gardening experimentation, and I've planted last fall virtually all the beds in this garden except for some garlic beds over there, which were planted with garlic in the fall. I planted them with rye. And I've been working my way along, cutting the rye off, and the way I showed of cutting it was to undercut it with a sharp hoe, and I've been using the harvested rye to mulch the mini beds. Now I've got 3 rows, I've got 27 mini beds here of really mature rye, and it's not a problem for me. This is the point I want to make. What is a problem in a conventional garden, or could be a serious problem in a conventional garden, is not a problem here. It's not a problem at all, as I'm going to show you. And what I'm going to do is leave a couple of these beds, the best looking ones. We're starting to get the pollen on here, and these I'm going to let them go to seed, and I'm going to harvest the seed off to plant my mini beds this fall. So if I can do that every year from a couple of mini beds, get enough seed to plant all of these mini beds, that's a good thing. I like that when you can do that. I do that with my garlic. I harvest the garlic every year. I take the best bulbs and I replant the cloves from those. I've got plenty of garlic and I've got my seed for the next year. Can I do that with rye? That's part of the experiment here. We're going to find out. Now, the rest of these beds, I'm going to do as I've been doing, or kind of as I've been doing. I'm going to cut the rye off. I'm going to cut it with my sickle. All right. The rain has been coming down pretty steady here. The ground is really wet. It's not ideal. It's much too wet for undercutting the roots and taking them out. And I should say undercutting the crown at the very base. The roots are below that. You cut below the crown, as I've showed in a previous video, so that it doesn't regrow, and you leave all the roots in the soil with this mini bed system. But today in this video I'm going to use my sickle to cut off these rye plants in the bed. I'm going to show it to you, and then I'm going to use the sickle to chop the tall rye, nearly 6 foot tall here, into smaller pieces. Before I demonstrate the process of sickle harvesting a tall bed of rye, I just want to show you how neat those beds look, so tall and waving in the breeze like that. All right, here's my sickle right here, and I bought this a couple years ago. It is very sharp, and I keep it sharp, and I'll show you how you could keep one sharp if you were to buy one. But what I'm doing is I'm grasping a bunch here. This mini bed was planted with the 13 spot planting template, and which means that I put a pinch of seeds in each of 13 spots, and those pinches turned into these beautiful full mini beds. But by planting in clumps like that, I can grab a bunch, each pinch, and just give it a cut. All right, so that's pretty simple, as long as you don't mind bending over. There's nothing to it. You want to be real careful that you don't chop off a finger. That would not be good. If you aren't comfortable using an extremely sharp tool like this with your hands close to the blade, then perhaps you wouldn't want to do this. But it works perfectly. So there you go. I harvested the bed, and as I said, I'm going to come back, and when the soil dries out, and I'll undercut these under the crowns, each of these bunches, and I'll knock the soil off. And that's why I have to wait for it to dry down. When it's wet like that, the soil won't come off like I want it to. All right, to cut these bunches into shorter lengths for easier mulching, that's what I'm going to use these for, is mulching. I just grab a bunch and come about a foot over and do that. Okay. So once again, this is not that hard to do. It's a simple process, as long as you don't mind bending over. I usually do this as I cut each bunch off. I don't put them in a big pile like this and then do it, but either way works. Beautiful mulch. Beautiful organic matter that will, in time, decompose. I recently made a video where I showed how to use sandpaper to sharpen pruning shears. And I'll put a link at the end of this video so you can click on it and watch it if you'd like. Sandpaper works. This is wet dry sandpaper. I made this little sanding stick with 220 grit paper on it for that video. And I've got 2 other grits. Here's a 320 and I have a 400. But the concept is pretty simple. You just strop you get it wet. Fortunately, we have a little water here in the mini bed garden. And you just strop it along one side and then the next. Okay? Pretty simple. Do that a few times. Okay, so yeah, look at how nice that works. These things are sharp, you know, sharp. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you in the next one.